Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 2021 meeting of the Triangle Association of Freelancers. We've got some really wonderful guests this evening with Elisa Lorello and her husband, Craig Lancaster, are coming to us from sunny, scenic Billings, Montana. Both are very accomplished novelists. Craig has published 9 novels and Elise published 11, plus a couple of nonfiction books, and both have been writing for many, many years. They offered to do a presentation this evening titled Memory plus Experience plus Imagination, a Storytelling Combo. And this is especially pertinent for people who write fiction this evening. So I'm going to turn this over to Elisa and Craig. It's all yours.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So where do you want to start this?
Okay.
I would like to start it with what was sort of the moment or the realization that crystallized for you that effective fiction for you was going to be some combination of this equation?
I was doing it without realizing I was doing it I think from the very beginning. And honestly, I think it started with me just not being confident at first and not necessarily thinking long term in terms of me being a novelist. My very, very first novel that I wrote, called Faking It, I had started with just this idea, but I didn't believe myself to be a novelist. I didn't believe myself to be a fiction writer. And so my attitude was, well, nobody has to read this but me. So for the meantime, let me use what I know. So so she was a New Yorker. She had brothers who were musicians. The happiest accident was that she was in the profession that I was in at the time, which I was teaching writing at the college level. And that especially worked out really well. But it started as, well, let me just kind of use this as a little bit of a crutch because I don't feel certain of my footing. But then the more comfortable I got as a novelist, the more this seemed to really work for me, to use these elements of memory and experience and couple it with imagination. And I don't think I was really, and I even talked about it in the writer's habit under this bigger umbrella of write what you know. But it wasn't until you and I started talking about it and you kind of put out that specific memory plus experience plus imagination. It's like, oh, well, yeah, that's what I do. That's what we do,
Yeah.
So how about for you?
Well, it's interesting, so I look back on my writing career and even the writing that I did before it was a career, I've always been very intuitive about things, which is good because when it comes to any sort of classic education, I tend to use a not altogether pleasant phrase. I tend to screw the pooch, so I would have this, like, the movement and the construction of language always made sense to me, and then later I would back construct. Oh, okay. Well, this is how sentence diagramming works, and this is, like, it all just, for whatever reason, made sense. And so it was a similar thing in fiction where I just sort of did this thing, and it was in analyzing it backward that I realized what was happening. And almost always somebody much smarter and much more accomplished than I am will say something, and I'll go, you know what, that's it. And so Larry Watson, who wrote, he's written a bunch of books, but the one that people might know now because of the movie Let Him Go, the Kevin Costner, Diane Lane movie. So he wrote that book. And he was interviewed and he said something like, I don't work from an outline, I work from memory. But then what I do is I apply imagination to the memory, which alters it and makes it something useful for fiction. And so it comes out on the other end, something that's truthful in its own way. And when I saw that quote, first I went, boy, that guy's good. And then second, I was like, that's it. That is precisely what happens. It's not transcription. It's not taking these things that you experienced or these things that you remember and saying, okay, well, let me capture what happened then. It is, this informs the idea that I have, and then the imagination comes in, because for better or for worse, I have lived this life. For 51 years, I've lived this life, and I don't need to relive it. I was there, and nobody wants to know anyway, because it's pretty boring and stupid. And so, but the imagination piece transforms it into something that is both accessible to me, and I'm going to pull this string and see where it goes, because I've got no idea now that imagination has gone to work on it. And it's a very, I don't want to say it's mystical, but it's just strange and inexplicable enough that every time I I find myself trying to explain it, I'm just like, well, you're just gonna have to trust me. That's the way it goes, And but yeah, it's powerful, and honestly, it's the most fun thing about writing, because
for me too. Yeah.
Finding out what's going to happen, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So.
By the way, for those people who don't know, we're married. and I'm upstairs and he's in the kitchen. So it was a lot easier for us to be in separate rooms than for us to be sharing a screen together.
Oh yeah, I told her, get out.
No.
Yeah, no, okay.
So, we are going to give you some examples of how we have applied this. But this kind of does fall under this umbrella of write what you know. And I have heard people say that is the best advice they ever got, writing advice they ever gotten. It's the worst writing advice they've ever gotten. And I think most people who say it's the worst, I think, have taken it way too literally. that they think it really is, even though some people do it, like I said, I have done it myself of, well, I'm a Long Islander, this is going to take place on Long Island, or I'm a writer, so I'm going to write about writing. But I think some people, they say, well, what about fantasy writing then? And it's like, fantasy writing to me can very easily fall under write what you know. That world very intimately, or that genre very intimately, and so for me, that is absolutely applicable. It doesn't have to be this, or people automatically think it's autobiographical writing, and even that. I think you can have some shades of that in there, but it doesn't have to be this very, very, very literal thing. Or they think John Grisham, who writes all, legal thrillers, and so he's just based on that. So how do you feel about that kind of, blanket generalization of write what you know?
Well, to the science fiction point, sometimes genre is such a weird construct, because I never think about, well, I need to write like I'm not thinking about what Barnes and Noble is thinking about when they're going to decide where to put my book, So like Animal Farm, it wasn't about an animal farm, you know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
Genre the genre is only as constricted as you allow it to be. Write what you know is an interesting thing, because I heard that all the time when I was growing up, and I thought, man, I'm gonna have to know a lot, and I just don't. I do, but I don't. I'm not a walking polymath.
Oh yes, you are.
But it's not so much what you know as what vehicles you can put what you want to say into. A good example, you said we were going to have some examples, so by God, I'm going to come through with one, is this book that's of mine that's coming out in May. It's called, I'll show you a advanced reading copy cover. So it's called And It Will Be a Beautiful Life. A lot of my titles are ironic, so the protagonist of this book is something that's called a pig tracker. And if any of you know what that is, raise your hand, because I'll be surprised if you do. A pig tracker is a pipeline worker. The pig is a tool that goes into the pipeline, and the tracker is someone who tracks its movements as it moves through the pipeline system. And I am a part-time pig tracker. And I knew when I got involved with pig tracking, which is a relatively recent development, like 2015, I knew early on when I was doing it that this was probably going to find its way into fiction, but I didn't become a pig tracker so I could write a novel. That would have, I just don't operate that way. And my pig tracker, the book is very much not about the pipeline, but the pipeline ends up being metaphorical, and it also ends up informing sort of his attitude toward the world that he lives in, and and the things about his life that he has to grapple with. And it's a very solitary, very it's one of those jobs that hide in plain sight. There are people who have this line of work and nobody knows about them. You live next door to a dentist, you don't live next door to a pig tracker, but you might live next door to a pig tracker, you just don't know. So that was interesting to me. Like I knew early on that I was going to be it was just too ripe with possibilities. But what happens, and this was something else you said only glancingly that I glommed onto, is one of the interesting things about being a writer is, or a novelist, is the people who think they know you because they read your book. Mm-hmm. I can think of my second novel had some pretty brutal scenes in it. And there was enough of what I had been through in my life that, people who knew me could tell that I had written it at least somewhat from memory and experience. But I remember my aunt saying to my mother, like, "Oh my God, did that happen to Craig?" And my mom's like, "No." And it didn't, that was the imagination. That was the, my life is boring. No offense, honey, you make it, beautiful. But what I can do with an ordinary life with some imagination is something else, right? So that's kind of that's kind of where that gets interesting.
Yeah.
So.
Do you want to ask me a question?
Yeah. So the question I want to ask you, because you write what I think we would broadly define as romantic comedy. How does, and I think you defy that genre in some ways, but in other ways you stick to it because, you know, you want your books to be shelved as well. So how does, you know, memory plus experience filter down into this has a romantic comedic outcome or journey on the page? Because I have a romantic relationship with you, and I know it wasn't all funny all the time, right? So like,
well,
yeah.
For me, I think I always found that love relationships always had a little bit of absurdity to them. So which is where or how or why I brought the comedy out of that, because you can, you know, because there is a little, and because when you're in love, you're always, you know, all the way up here, you know, your brain's kind of lit up like a Christmas tree, and you're not really, you know, your feet aren't really fully on the ground. So, but so that I think just became the vehicle for the comedic part. It was always the memory and experience part was always, I think, working around the imagination. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I'll have to give an example too. So Big Sky Littleton. Okay, I got books to show too.
Okay.
So here we go. That's my cover. I don't know if it's coming out backwards or not. But
it'll make you crave blueberries.
Huckleberries.
Huckleberries, that's right. Yeah.
So now that I was contracted to write, I had a 2-book deal in 2015, and I had already pitched book 1, and I had pitched book 2 that actually they didn't like the idea for it, which, by the way, I just finally finished that particular manuscript that I pitched. But so for a while it was just book 2, and it, you know, so I worked on the first one, and then so I was thinking about well, what am I going to do about this? And it was around this particular time that so Craig and I began as a long distance relationship. So I was actually living in was it Massachusetts? Well, I was living in North Carolina when we met in 2011. I had just moved to Long Island in October of 2014. And you had been in Billings all that time. So when Craig and I got together, we got together in 2015, and we literally were flying back and forth to each other's states, and at some point when we knew what one of us was going to have to make the move, it was for reasons that are not pertinent to this discussion, it was decided that I was going to move to Montana. So we moved together. Craig helped me move across the country in the beginning of 2016, and my experience coming to Billings and moving into Billings, I mean, this place had never been on my radar as in terms of where I would possibly want to live, and not saying that in a bad way, it just wasn't. And we it was a very welcoming experience. I mean, Craig's friends very, very quickly became my friends, and then I made some friends of my own. I got immersed into the community very quickly. So it was all things considered, it was a fairly easy transition. So when it came time for me to write this novel, and I came up with this character of Sky, her name was Sky Littleton. And of course I played on Big Sky, meaning Montana. I was too happy at that point. I mean, you and I were in love. We were getting married. I had, I had this overwhelming love and support, and I was immediately embraced by your friends and family. So what I had to do was flip that on its head. And so instead of writing a novel about somebody who comes to Billings and has this wonderful, and adapts quickly, I decided to do the exact opposite. So this woman is in a long distance relationship. She goes to Billings, Montana to be with this guy. The guy ghosts her when she arrives, and just completely, and she's given up her entire life to move to Billings. And so now she has to figure out, is she going to stay there, or is she going to go back east with her tail between her legs and try to start over again? And doesn't.
And she's
really
got nothing
know.
left. She's got
nothing left. She's not necessarily burned bridges, but she's definitely given up her job, and she can't really go back to that. And she wasn't really happy in her job to begin with. She's lost her apartment. She's really left everything behind, thinking she's starting her happily ever after.
Right.
So,
and what I can say as a reader of that book is that your experience and your memory of Billings and moving to Billings all came out in that book. It's all there.
Yes.
And the setup is the imaginary part, and the way you pull her through that experience is the imaginary part.
Right. So I use the experience of being a newcomer to this place, and seeing, it's definitely a different scenic experience from the East Coast, for example. So having that, and then having this different kind of community. So I certainly pulled those experiences and thought about those things from my memory. What was it like when I first saw the view of the city from the Rim Rocks? What was my memory of driving down 27th Avenue? That type of thing. Or 27th Street, excuse me. So those things were the memory and the experience. And like I said, the imaginative part was turning that on its head. And instead of acclimating in this very loving way, she's acclimating in a very lonely way. And so that was great, because that's where the challenge comes in, and the fun part of writing, because then I get to explore character, and it's not, and it's not if I want to write autobiographically, I'll write a memoir about what it was like to move to Montana from the East Coast and what that experience was like.
Megan asked a question that I think feeds into all of this. She said, how do you apply this concept of writing what you know when you literally can't know? For example, writing the perspective or characterization of another gender. And then she asked about, can the technique be applied to create a more balanced representation of genders within a work of fiction? I think that's a really good question. I don't know that I feel to this point that I can address the specifics of it, but I can say that research, to whatever extent you need it, sometimes can be your friend. Conversations with people with that lived experience can be your friend. Making sure that you're not just poaching something. Cultural appropriation is a big thing now, and something that we are more cognizant of than we used to be, and that on the whole is probably a good thing. But you also don't want to hem yourself in. You want to be able to approach those subjects in a way that does service to them. My first book was about a guy on the autism spectrum. And that was, and again, it was something that was back constructed. My idea was about a guy who was ruled by his routines and thrown off by interruptions to those. So I thought I was probably dealing with someone who was autistic. So then I tried to acquaint myself with behaviors and traits, not so much diagnostics, because I was afraid that I would write a diagnostic book if I absorbed too much of that. But I wanted to know what he would be like. And it's I think it's a very funny book, but I didn't want him to be the butt of the joke, which I don't think he ever is. And that was sort of how I kept the faith with something like you say, Megan, something I literally can't know. You know, I mean, it's something I can observe, but it's nothing that I'm going to know in my bones or in my brain or in my heart what someone who's living that, what that, you know, so that I think is a combination of, you know, educating yourself and then also using your imagination in a way that's not destructive, you know.
And if I can add to that, and I'm glad I wrote the quote down because I thought it might come up. So Emilio Estevez, Martin Sheen's son, or if you remember him from the Brat Pack Breakfast Club and stuff, revealing my Gen X identity. He had said that when because if you might not know, he's mostly on the writing directing now. He writes and directs these independent films. So he did the most recent one he did was called The Public, and I think it came out in late 2019, which was about a Chicago public library that let in, it was the coldest night of the year, and all the homeless came into the library for the night, and it was not legal, but that was what that movie was about. Before that, he did a movie called The Way, which was about walking the Camino in oh my goodness, I'm totally blanking out all of a sudden, in Spain. And then before that, he had a movie called Bobby, which was about the Ambassador Hotel. It was a series of stories of people at the Ambassador Hotel on the day Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. So he had said that when he was writing, he was starting to write, I think it was Bobby, and was struggling a little bit. And his mother said, write movies that are thematically close to wherever you're coming from at that point in your life. So even I think if you don't have the direct experience or even the direct memory, I was not born when Kennedy died, but if that was something that was drawing me as a subject, or if I had that idea, what would it be? You know, what if, such and such a thing happened at the Ambassador Hotel the same day Bobby Kennedy was there? I mean, that might be a story I would want to write, or a novel I would want to write, but I have no direct experience. But it's what in my consciousness is driving me to write that, set the story in that place, in that time, with these people. And I don't necessarily need to know them personally. I don't need to know their professions. I don't need to know that particular time, but something about it is drawing me. And it could be, whatever that theme is, could be home, it could be family, it could be living each day as if it's your last. Whatever is driving me to do it is what propels me to that particular story in that particular time and place. even if I don't have the direct experience. I mean, and I might even talk about a little bit about also, and I don't really like to talk about my unpublished work, but the novel I just finished, I interviewed somebody who I'll just say I interviewed somebody who was very close to me and whom I grew up with, and knew what he did for a living, and yet I interviewed him and observed him as if I'd never seen him do it before, and wanted to get the feel that way, instead of just saying, well, I remember what it was like growing up and seeing him do this thing.
Yeah. I'm a little less reluctant to talk about what I'm working on. So just in the last 4 or 5 days, I started a new manuscript that you know how quickly it came upon me. It's set in 1982 in North Texas, where I grew up. And every day that I sit down with it, I'm, to one extent or another, I'm looking through my 12-year-old eyes at, and of course I've forgotten what I was wearing when I was 12. So I'm doing Google image searches to see, man, we looked stupid. But like I'm trying to, both in my memory eye, but also in my, looking through historical photographs and lists of slang and all this, I'm trying to get myself back there. And then I'm imagining, writing from the perspective of someone who is the age that my father was in 1982. And, it's just, and I don't want to interview him, I don't. I want this to be a product of my imagination, but there's definitely lived experience and lived memory in there. It's where the pull was,
Yes.
It's, the particular aspects of this story are pulling me from 1982 in North Texas, which is where I was in 1982. I haven't said so in so many words, but I've dropped this family right in the neighborhood I lived in, not in my house, but like I can see it. I can see where they are and what they're doing. And and it's so interesting now that to portray people interacting with each other when they don't have text and they don't have Facebook, and I'm trying to like remember how in the world did I get through an entire day, without my phone and seeing what's going on. Like, and I did. I went there 365 days a year until I was like 28. I did. How? That's how fast it has just sort of fundamentally transformed our behaviors. And part of that, I think, I'm sure, is driven by, I don't want to write a pandemic book. I do not want to write a novel in which somebody's going through the pandemic. I don't know what I want to say about that. I'm living through it like everybody else is, and my feelings are entirely unresolved. I got a pretty good handle on anger, but I'm dealing with the rest of them, right? So I don't want to write a pandemic book. So, boy, the safest way to not write a pandemic book is to go almost 40 years in reverse. Can't go too far. If you go 100 years, you're back in another pandemic. But yeah.
I felt the need to do the same. I felt the need to go back a little bit and not frontwards. One more thing I wanted to touch on a little bit. And again, by the way, just to also clarify, this is not a formula. This is not like 20% imagination or 30% memory. This is, it's a little bit of everything, and it comes in different forms and different quantities, and sometimes it's jumbled together and sometimes it's all together. But one more thing I wanted to talk about was this idea that I personally call it repurposing. And I stole that line from, I don't know if anybody watches Chopped on Food Network, this cooking competition show. So they're given a certain basket of ingredients that seemingly just don't go together. You know, like they get a box of Fruit Loops and a jar of olives and a thing of kale, and they've got to make an entree out of that or something like that. And so they call it repurposing. Well, I love the way you repurposed these Fruit Loops to make a sauce, or something like that. So I find that I do that in different ways in terms of, and here's the example I most commonly use in my novel Ordinary World. Again, here's my cover that I absolutely hate this book cover, but there it is. So what I did with the novel opens with a death. So I'll just say it that way. And the main character, it's a few days, I think, after she's experienced this death, and she goes to the grocery store in an attempt to do something normal. And she's kind of just pushing this empty cart up and down the aisles and not really cognizant, not really with it. And then she finally stops and she picks up a thing of Keebler cookies and then a carton of milk, and she goes home and gets what I call cookie drunk, where she eats the whole thing of cookies and downs the whole thing of milk. This really happened to me. and it happened on 9/11, where I did not know. I had two friends, one of whom was my childhood friend, my best friend, who worked in the building next door to one of the Twin Towers. And I thought she was in the tower. And I just, of course, when you're seeing those images, you just, at that point, you didn't think anybody survived and you didn't know who survived. So I spent the day not knowing if she was alive. And didn't know what to do with myself, because I also couldn't call any of my New York family, and I had a brother at the time who was working in the city, so I couldn't get through to anybody. So I really spent the day in a stupor, and so that was one of the things I tried to do. I tried to do something normal. So I said, well, let me just go food shopping, and that's exactly what happened. I wasn't really I couldn't focus on anything. And that's exactly what I did. I finally just picked up a thing of cookies and a thing of milk, and I went home and I just ate everything, because I don't drink. So that was my way of numbing out. And just an aside, she's alive and well, to this day. But that's an example of repurposing. And there were a couple of novels where I have stuck in something that actually happened to me, but put it in a completely different context, because it was, again, the closest thing that I could, what is this character processing? Oh, well, it was like the time when I did this. And so instead of trying to find something similar to that, I'm like, well, I'm just going to have her do that, so that's how I call repurposing.
Well, that probably feeds in a little bit to this question that Louisa, did I say that right, Louisa? Yes, okay. Asked us, do you have any advice for not creating characters that are too autobiographical? I tend to create characters like myself. So I talked earlier about the pig tracker. So I have a good example of how to avoid that from that book. The pig tracker, not surprisingly, carried some aspects of me, notably his sarcasm. And but what transforms him into something someone different from me is the circumstance that he's in. A good deal of this book is about how he sort of finds his way forward with his adult daughter. His daughter's 32. My daughter is, because she does not exist. So that was a way for me to take this guy who is clearly I've imbued him with some of me, because won't he be exciting then? And then I've sent him off in directions that I know nothing about, and that transformed him. That it makes him a little like me, but not entirely. And you wouldn't mistake us at a party for each other. And so yeah.
Well, and Craig and I co-wrote a novel called You, Me, and Mr. Blue Sky. I don't have that one to show because I wasn't planning on using that one. But we actually it's kind of a he said, she said, and then celestial being said. So and that's we called him Mr. Blue Sky. So so one thing that Craig and I decided to do was actually switch. Instead of him writing the man's point of view and me writing the female point of view, we switched. So Craig predominantly wrote Jojo, and I predominantly wrote Linus. And they, Jojo was a personal trainer and opening a gym, and Linus was a former math teacher turned contractor. And so neither of us have any familiarity with any of those professions. And certainly we are opposite genders, but I think what we tapped into was some of their emotional baggage, I guess, in terms of they struggled with boundaries, and they had abandonment issues and things like that, and so, and again, it wasn't autobiographical, like, oh well, I've got abandonment issues. It was more of I can feel there. It was almost empathy. It was an experience. It was an experience and empathy. Yeah.
Well, and Linus, probably not surprising now that you know the secret. Linus was probably more in touch with his feminine than the average guy, whatever the average guy is. And Jojo had some harder edges than, than
the average woman. Yeah.
Well, right. Like, I mean, it's weird to think of it this way because I'm so not in that mode, but like, would I have attempted to date Jojo? Luckily for her, I probably wouldn't have. But like, I would have wanted to figure Jojo out, and that was the fun part of writing her, was, trying to figure out what's going on in there. So we have one more question, and that I'm going to answer fairly quickly, and then I have to peel off and go to my phony baloney job. And this is from Zeal. Did I say that right? Zeal? I mean, it's not too hard, right? So it's 4 letters, but I can always mess up things. What motivates the both of you as far as writing goes, and what is your inspiration? For me, it's got to be the fame. No, I'm kidding. It's not the fame at all. It really is sort of, and I know this sounds mystical and all that, and I don't want it to. It really is about, every time I finish a book, I feel like I figured out a little bit more about myself and about the world that I'm in and the people who are in it. And that's very limited by, the people I come into contact with, and and all of that. And, you know, I realized that. But there are universal things. There are, what are we motivated by, and why are we motivated by it, and why do we undermine ourselves, and why do we, you know, why do we step in it, and why do we make the same mistakes over and over again? And that part is instructive to. I tend to start at people from crossroads. You know, in any character in a book is at some sort of juncture where it can go better or it can go sideways, and maybe it's been going sideways for a while. So that's sort of how I approach it. It's just figuring things out, you know. Being in a constant state of curiosity and befuddlement, I think, is probably, you know, and you use one to try to make the other better. So
I have a little bit of similarity with that in terms of I usually say I write to figure out what I know, or I'm writing to figure out what I feel about something. But I also, so there's an exploration of truth there. I also, it's one of the constants in my life. You know, like there's my twin brother, there's Duran Duran, and there's writing, and and not necessarily in that order, sometimes, but it's all from the time I learned how to put the letters together and put the words together. I've been doing it. And so, whether it's been in a professional or unprofessional or private capacity, I've always done it. And I feel like I can't not do it. And as far as inspiration, you know, I could just be watching Downton Abbey and I get an idea, you know, of something that seemingly has nothing to do with the plot of the show or something, but something that one of the characters says inspires me, or I'm on Twitter and I see a tweet, and the tweet all of a sudden is like, you know, that's a great idea for a novel. So it comes when I'm not looking. I can't sit down and say, what am I going to write about today? Or in terms of a novel. I mean, that's why for a while, it took a while for Big Sky Littleton to come around, because I didn't necessarily have anything. It germinated for a while, it marinated until I finally said, until I had the what if. For me, it's always a what if. And it was, what if I write about somebody who gets to Billings and her life gets completely turned upside down, instead of she comes to Billings and her life gets very good. So it's a what if, and it is, and that what if comes from anywhere. But it's also, I write because I can't not do it.
can I break in and just say
Yes.
goodbye and thank
Yes.
you, Dawn and everyone. And I love the questions, and
I'll take it from here.
And I'm sorry for my awkwardness that just is baked into the cake. So yeah, so
we really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Yeah, you bet. Bye-bye.
Take care.
So, but I'm here, so I can
okay.
Answer some
Does anyone
questions.
have any additional questions for Elisa? Well, we have her. I can't see everybody. Maybe Hannah can. So, or if you do have a question, just unmute yourself and go ahead and shout it out.
So tell me how you found your publisher and how you maintain a good relationship with them.
Well, the answer to the second part is I don't have a relationship with them anymore, unfortunately. This is kind of one of the ways that Craig and I met, actually, is we had the same we got published around the same time by this publisher, and neither of us kind of went in through the front door necessarily. This was around 2010 when the ebook phenomenon exploded, and we had both self-published our debut novels respectively. You know, we didn't know each other at the time, but Amazon started their own publishing company, you know, like a Simon and Schuster or like Penguin, and so their flagship imprint was called Amazon Encore. So what they were doing was they were looking at these very, very successful self-published authors and offering to reissue their books with new covers and copy editing and some marketing and all of that. So Craig and I were both fortunate enough to be picked up by them for that. And it just so happened at the time that and we both happened to have the same acquisitions editor. And so from there we developed the relationship of, and what else do you have, what else are you working on? So even though it started with this work that was already in the world, we continued. He published, I think, 3 or 4 more books with them, and I did about the same. I think I did three or 4, and that 2 book deal that I talked about was the last that I had with them. By the time we left, so we were signed in 2010. By the time we left, we parted ways with them. It was 2015, I think, 2016. Actually probably even later than that, 2017, I think we finally parted ways. And it was just that they were no longer the company they courted us with. And you know, it's funny, we brought up Animal Farm earlier. I call it the Animal Farm experience, in that they became the very thing they were rebelling against. They had started as this very innovative, hey, we're going to do it better than traditional publishing does. And they started that way. And we were very, very successful. But the more successful they got, the more they fell in line with traditional publishing, and they were not taking the risks they were taking when they first signed us. They were rejecting a lot more of our books. You mean Mr. Blue Sky, it was funny. They said, oh, we want you guys to co-write a book, and we want it to be a he said, she said. So we write this book, and then they go, we love you, but we're going to pass on that. So it's like, we did what you asked us, and you're not even, you know, you rejected this out of the gate. So we decided to part ways, and we were also getting a little, we wanted to be more aligned with the independent booksellers, and Amazon just is not friendly to independent booksellers. So our experience with Amazon publishing in the early years was great. And I'm not saying anything, you know, I don't want to say they're horrible or anything like that. But it just no longer was a good fit for either one of us. So even though those books have remained with APUB, we don't really push the ebooks anymore. We very much say, if you would like to buy one of our books, please go to your favorite independent bookseller. So for you guys, it's Quail Ridge. You know, please go to Quail Ridge and support them and buy a paperback copy of our books. And actually, I don't think Quail Ridge will even sell you some of our books because they're APUB published. So Craig's new book, And It Will Be a Wonderful Life, It Will Be a Beautiful Life, is a smaller press. It's an independent press called The Story Plant, and that's a new relationship he's building, and he's been really happy with them. And I am currently without a publisher.
Hopefully not for long.
Hopefully not for long, because I do have a literary agent. So this new book, this new manuscript, is in the hands of my agent as we speak. So
great.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Elisa? Again, just shout it out. I can't see everybody, so if you have anything to say. Okay. All right, Elisa, thank you so much
Thank
for this
you.
presentation. It was awesome. The presentation was great. It was wonderful seeing you again.
Yes,
and getting to know
you.
Craig a lot better. And I wish you the very best of luck on the projects both of you have going right
Thank you.
now. They both
Thank
sound
you.
really exciting. And some of you older, not by age, but by membership of TAF may remember that Elisa presented at Right Now 2012. So
I
she's
presented at 2 of them, I think. I think I presented at 2010.
Maybe.
Or
Yeah.
2011 and 2012. But
That
yeah,
could be.
I did two presentations. Yeah,
You've been a friend of TAF for a very
I
long time.
have.
And we
Yeah.
appreciate that. And you used to teach it at NC State, right?
Yes, I did. I
What did you
did.
teach?
I taught English 101 and 102. Did they have an English 102? Yeah. Yeah.
You want to hang with us for a couple minutes?
Yeah, sure. I'd love
Awesome. This is
to.
the part
I'd
of our
love
meeting
to.
where everybody shares their good news if they have some. I'll go first. This week, I delivered my first article to Vanderbilt magazine. And I'm hoping it's the first of many, but this is a profile of Megan Martin, who is a very popular American Ninja Warrior competitor. And she's a 2012 grad of Vanderbilt, and she was just awesome to talk to and write about. So that was a lot of fun. And Vanderbilt is a lucrative market, so I would encourage all of you to keep that in mind. If you know some people who are Vanderbilt grads who might be doing really interesting stuff, it's definitely worth a pitch. And so, this is my first, and I hope it's one of many. Does anyone else have some good news to share?
Well, we're still accepting submissions for the TAF anthology.
I delivered mine. I could not wait to
Yes.
write it. And
Thank you
so
very
the
much.
deadline is March 31st, but I think it would make Arlene's job a little bit easier if she got them in a trickle rather than a flood at the very end.
And actually, it would keep me from getting anxiety attacks that no one's going to send anything.
Nah, you'll get a lot, I know. And the
And
theme
I also,
is
by the
books
way,
on our
if there are
shelf.
any Jane Austen fans, I'm doing an anthology nonfiction on Jane Austen. So if anyone's interested, please just email me and I'll send the guidelines and the idea.
Terrific. And the theme of the TAF anthology is the books on our shelves and what they mean to us. And so I'd really encourage everybody, if you've got a story to tell, by all means, put it together and send it off to Arlene. So
Yes.
you had your
Can
hand up?
I just ask a question
Oh,
about
yeah,
that?
sure.
Is that just for TAF members, or can anybody make a submission?
It's really for TAF members, but you've
Okay.
been such a good friend of TAF. If you've got an essay you would like to submit, I don't think we would say no to that.
I would love to, yeah, if you could send me the guidelines. Yeah, you piqued my interest.
Absolutely. I'll send that to you in the morning.
Where do I find the guidelines?
Well, we had
I'll
some.
send them. Yeah, I'll send them out again
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
all TAF members and I'll send one to Alicia.
Okay.
great. Super. Yeah, we'd love to have
Thank you.
something from you, Lisa. That would be awesome. Sue Barnett, you had something to share?
Yes. Well, I think everybody knows by now that my first book, yeah, look at Nancy, got accepted by a publisher, by a small.
Congratulations.
That's awesome news.
And they said, well, you need an agent, you need a lawyer. And yes, I did, So the contract has been overwhelming for me. I wish I had started this a long time ago.
13 pages.
Yeah, but it's just, there's just some, we're part of Legal Shield. I know, I know that one of you was selling it for a while. So, he wasn't as good as the literary guy, but I don't know. There was just some stuff in it that when it sounded like I would be giving them the rights to my book for the duration of the copyright, which is my life plus 70 years. It's grant and is that typical, Elisa?
No.
Yeah, well, it depends who you're with, but yeah, typically it is a life thing. Now, one thing with Craig and I in terms of where we are going forward with publishers is we try to negotiate that so that it's not that we try to put in options to revert the rights and that sort of thing. One good thing about Amazon Publishing is so far they've been very good with, if we want the rights back to a book, they pretty much give it to us with no, no fight, nothing. So Craig asked for at least one of his books back. He asked for The Summer Sun, and they gave that back to him with no problem. I'm thinking of taking one of my books back called Adulation within the next year, and I don't foresee them giving me a problem with it. So I think it depends on the particular publisher that, and you can even ask them that, listen, if at any point I'm on and I am unhappy with this, can I take this book back and see what they say? Or like I said, if you've got a good entertainment lawyer or intellectual property lawyer, try to see what you can negotiate with that. Like there is an option for you to have the rights reverted.
Yeah.
But
Well-
yeah, it's most big six, publishers, that's typically what they're going to
Make
do.
sure you read that contract from top to bottom as thoroughly as you can, Sue, and make sure you understand everything in it. And if you don't, obviously ask questions. Because,
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
your career moving forward is dependent on this document.
No pressure. Well, actually, I called Drew today, and Drew is lovely, and he gave me a lot of advice. I trust my lawyer. I wish I had an agent. I'm not going to try to deal with an agent at this point.
Yeah.
I have till mid-March to sign. But it was really kind of funny because I sent an email to the attorney today, and I said, I'm still really confused by this contract, but this particular section I'm having a really hard time with. And he goes, it's very interesting that you wrote to me when you did, because we had sent the contract back with his alterations. And then he had a long conversation. I don't know what this is going to cost me in the end, but he had a long conversation with him. He goes, you're confused about that term, but the publishing house seems to be confused about it too. So just never sign a contract without somebody around.
I used an entertainment lawyer for the first 5 years before I signed with an agent. So from 2010 to 2015, he dealt with intellectual property. And actually I just one of my novels, actually I am trying to get back. It was with a completely different publisher that has gone belly up and didn't bother to tell their authors that they went belly up. So I'm in the process of trying to
I would think that would
track
automatically
somebody
revert
down,
Wouldn't that automatically revert to you if they're no longer in business?
No, they
Okay.
didn't even tell me.
The hard part is getting it down from Amazon, Smashwords, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, getting it down.
They
because
didn't
you're not the person that put it up.
Yeah, they didn't even tell me. So I'm trying to track somebody down to talk to me before I could do
My
anything,
first
take
publisher did
anything
that.
else. Yeah.
But
So
the contract said if their website ever goes down and the company, it's more than 2 weeks. So it was some kind of little print. It said it reverted back. So I had that contract.
Yeah. And this particular book of mine was actually technically a work for hire gig. So it wasn't, so they hired me to write this particular book.
Ooh.
And but I still do draw royalties from it. So that's why it's a little bit more tricky. But yeah, I went through an intellectual property lawyer with that particular contract too. So yeah, he was indispensable to me for the first 5 years of my career until I got my literary agent.
Yeah. Okay. I don't mean to take up your time, but sorry.
It's an important question, Sue, and it's an experience a lot of us have gone through or possibly could go through. So, sharing that is really important. We appreciate that.
I wish I could just take a course and at least learn some of these stupid terms.
Yeah. Well,
there is a book. I have not read it yet, but it is on my list of books I need to get, called The Business of Being a Writer by Jane Friedman. And my guess is she covers some of that.
Yeah.
All right, that's what I
Jane
need.
is a great resource.
Yeah.
Now, I know this is boring to all of you, but you're all going
anyone
to
else have some good news to share?
Sorry?
What, pardon?
Well, I know this is putting everyone to sleep, but when you're famous, and you get accepted, you're going to really appreciate this conversation. Because I wish I had started this a year ago, just understanding contracts. I really do, because now I'm under the gun and I'm like, what the fuck, So,
Well,
but
a lot of
hey,
us-
somebody wants to publish my book, so that's fun,
On that note, I am going to take my leave. But Don, thank you so much for having both Craig and myself.
Absolutely, Elisa. Thank you so much
We
for
love
joining.
talking about this subject, and we loved sharing it with you. And it was nice to virtually be back in my old stomping grounds.
Oh, we loved having you. You guys were awesome. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate the
Thank you.
presentation. Keep us posted on everything.
Will do. Thanks so
Awesome.
much.
I'll talk to you
Okay.
soon.
So long, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Don, I actually have some news.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of poems coming out in the Heron anthology, and I think it's April.
Awesome. That's fantastic. How many?
I think there's 2.
Great.
Yes.
Is it a paying gig?
No.
That's fine. You're
But
published. You get the
finally
book.
getting
That's
published
the
again,
important
that's right.
thing.
Yes.
That's great. Good for you.
Oh, Megan, you were talking earlier. Your question was about how do you write characters that for whose experience you have no idea about. I would recommend, there's a great middle school novel called Lily and Duncan, Lily and Duncan, by Donna Gephardt, who is another friend of TAF.
Oh, Donna. Yeah.
And Donna is just a spectacular writer, but this book features a transgender girl and a boy with bipolar disorder and their relationship. And Donna researched, she didn't just start writing, she researched these topics for a couple of years to make sure that she could get into their brain realistically and accurately. So it's an easy book to find. You can find it anywhere. It's, like I said, it's middle school, so it's a quick read, but I think that you would find her approach to that really, really interesting.
Yeah, I was actually asking more on behalf of my dad. As a beta reader for him, he's introduced a character in his novel that is a female biomedical scientist from the 1960s. And she has broken up with one of the characters because he put work before her and all this stuff. And I turned to him because he literally just mentioned her. She's not appeared yet. And I said, if you do not make this a badass woman, I will disown you. Like you have to understand the context of a woman in the 1960s making those choices. And I don't know that my dad, as much as I love him, knows how to write from that perspective. So I was challenging him, but also then curious how they would have approached it. The answer was very much what I would have done, which is research the hell out of it or have your daughter help you. So.
There you go. I can't wait to read what your dad writes, though.
Honestly, my book club is the beta readers, and every book we've read in the past 2 months, we have preferred his to what we are reading, including Jane Austen. So he's doing well.
Does anyone else have any good news to share? All righty. Well, Sue?
I just wanted to share, it's kind of related to what we were talking about, and I don't mean to monopolize. I've been doing a lot of the NYC midnight contests. They're just a ton of fun. They have microfiction and fiction, and they send you a prompt and you have 24 hours to do it. And I tried the short story, which is you're given a whole week, and the assignment was historical fiction, and you have to use a fashion trend. And I love work for some reason. I just love working under that kind of pressure. I don't know what it is, but I have so much fun with it. It's like fun. And then you get this whole community going. So I grew up with a bunch of Latvian people, and I said, oh my God, they came over. And, I don't know if you guys know, but during the Cold War, Stalin was going in and killing Latvians, and a bunch of them migrated, Lithuanians, to the United States. And I'm thinking, nobody in the world writes about this, and I had grown up around it, their angst for their native country and stuff. So I decided, they immigrated in the 60s, and I decided to do a mini skirt, and it was historical fiction in the 1960s, okay? I mean, the mini skirt, it's like iconic, right? So I scribble off an email to my friends, my Latvian friends, And I go, isn't this a great idea? I'm going to write about you, and it's going to be about mini skirts and how your mother hated it. Well, let me tell you, they got really pissed off. I mean, they were really pissed off. And so I wrote back, and I called them and I say, I'm really sorry, blah, blah, blah. This is what I was thinking, but they were still pissed. So I switched the story to Lithuanians. But out of respect for them, all my little, anecdotes, I think that's kind of what she was talking about. The emotional connection that you want to make to a story. Out of respect for them, I left those out. I had a knowledge of, what their angst and what they were going through, but out of respect, I kept it, more center lane. But
That's probably a
you
good.
You have to be really careful of that you can really upset people when you write.
Yeah. So, well, this was a great meeting. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed it also. I guess we'll call it a day. Our next meeting will be in March, last Wednesday in March. And in April, we'll have our second TAF talk with Nancy Kress. And we've got some guest speakers lined up for our monthly meetings through May. So everything is looking really exciting. So
Are you going to be sending out the video of the comedian last night?
I'm waiting for John to put it together to work his magic. So I'll have a link that I can send to everybody.
Oh, lovely. All
So,
right. Good
yeah.
night, everyone.
I'll
Great
be
to see
doing
you.
Great to
Thank
see
you so
all of you. I
much.
hope you all have a wonderful evening. Megan, tell your dad we said hi, and we'll
will.
talk to all of you later. You have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you.
care.
Tell Nan we said hey.
Will do.